The wind came mean that morning, the kind that stripped paint off wood and hope off bone. Mara stood at the kitchen window with her father's coffee cup still unwashed in the basin, watching dust devils spin themselves to death across the yard. 26 years old, and she'd already buried two men she loved. The cup was chipped along the rim where her father used to rest his thumb. She couldn't bring herself to clean it, couldn't bring herself to do much of anything lately except exist in the spaces between grief and the next thing that would probably try to kill her. The ranch looked smaller every day. What had once seemed like empire, 300 acres of scrubland and hope stretched between the Bitterroot Mountains and nothing, now felt like a grave plot she was tending until someone came to fill it in. Her husband Thomas had died first, back in February when the fever swept through. 32 years old and strong as creekstone, reduced to shivers and apologies in 4 days flat. She'd held his hand until it went cold, then dug his grave herself because the ground was frozen and there was no one else to do it. Her father had followed in April. Same fever, different speed. He lasted 9 days, long enough to tell her to sell the land and go back east where her mother's people were. Long enough to make her promise. Long enough to break that promise before he was even under the ground. "I'm not leaving," she'd said to his headstone the day after the burial. "I don't care what you wanted. This is mine." Stupid, stubborn, suicidal probably. But it was all she had left. She turned from the window and looked at the mess she'd been living in. Dishes stacked in the basin, laundry piled on the table. The rifle Thomas had taught her to shoot, poorly, leaning against the doorframe like some kind of guardian that didn't actually guard anything. She'd fired it maybe 6 times in her life. Hit what she was aiming at twice, and one of those had been the broadside of the barn from 10 feet away. Not exactly the skill set you wanted when men with guns started eyeing your land. The Hutchins gang had been working their way south for 3 months now, leaving bodies and burned homesteads in their wake. Mara had heard the stories in town, how they'd killed a family of 5 over near Deer Lodge, how they'd strung up a deputy in Missoula and left him swinging from a telegraph pole, how they took what they wanted and anyone who objected ended up as a cautionary tale. Last week they'd hit the Morrison place, 15 miles north, killed Ed Morrison and both his sons, took everything that wasn't nailed down, and burned the rest. Ed's wife Helen had made it to town somehow, half dead from exposure and grief, babbling about men with cold eyes and laughter like broken glass. Mara had visited her at the boarding house where the church ladies were keeping her. Helen had grabbed her wrist with fingers like bird claws and said, "They're coming for you next." They said so. Said the widow on the Whitlock Ranch was next because there's no one to stop them. That had been 3 days ago. Mara hadn't slept since. She picked up the rifle, checked the chamber for maybe the 100th time that week, and set it back down. Her hands were shaking. Not from fear exactly, or not just from fear, but from rage so deep it had nowhere to go except into her fingertips. Rage at Thomas for dying, at her father for dying, at herself for staying when any sane person would have already been halfway to St. Louis. A knock at the door damn near stopped her heart. She grabbed the rifle, this time not putting it down. "Who is it?" "U.S. Marshal Service, ma'am. We need to talk." She didn't lower the rifle when she opened the door. 2 men stood on her porch, both wearing trail dust and the kind of tired that went bone deep. The one who'd spoken was older, maybe 45, with silver threading through dark hair and eyes that had seen too much and believed too little. The other was younger, tall and lean, with a jaw that looked like it had been carved with a hatchet, and then left rough on purpose. The older one touched the brim of his hat. "Mara Whitlock? Who's asking?" "Marshal Samuel Beck. This is my deputy, Cole Brennan. We're tracking the Hutchins gang. Got word they might be headed this direction." "They already are," Mara said. "Helen Morrison told me I'm next. So if you're here to warn me, you're late. If you're here to help, where the hell have you been for the last 3 months while they carved their way across Montana?" Beck didn't flinch. "We've been following them. They're smart. They scatter after a raid, regroup in places we can't predict. By the time we hear about an attack, they're already 2 counties over." "Convenient." The younger one, Brennan, spoke for the first time. His voice was quieter than she expected, rougher. "We know where they are now, or we will, soon. They've been using a canyon about 20 miles from here as a staging ground. We've got a man inside who can get word to us when they move." "Good for you." Mara started to close the door. Beck put his boot against it. Not aggressive, just firm. Mrs. Whitlock, we're not here to warn you. We're here to ask for your help. She laughed, actually laughed, sharp and humorless. My help? I can barely shoot a rifle without bruising my shoulder. What exactly do you think I can help you with? Bait, Brennan said. The word landed between them like a stone. Mara looked from one man to the other. Beck's face was carefully neutral. Brennan's was harder to read. There was something in his eyes that might have been sympathy or might have been calculation. She couldn't tell which and didn't like either option. You want me to let them come here, she said slowly. You want me to stay on this ranch alone and wait for a gang of murderers to show up so you can, what, arrest them? Ambush them, Beck corrected. We'll be here, hidden. When they arrive, we take them. How many men do you have? 2, Beck said. Me and Cole. 2. Mara felt the laugh building again, this time edged with something that might crack into screaming if she let it. 2 men against how many? 6 in the gang, Brennan said. Maybe 7. Our information varies. So 3-to-1 odds. On my land. With me as the lure. She shook her head. No, absolutely not. They're coming anyway, Beck said quietly, whether we're here or not. The question is whether you want to face them alone or with help. Some help. 2 men with rifles against 7 killers. We're not just men with rifles, Brennan said. And there was an edge to it now, something sharp beneath the rough velvet of his voice. We're the reason 3 other gangs aren't operating in this territory anymore. We're good at this. Good enough to die on my porch, probably. Maybe. He didn't look away. But we're asking anyway. Mara stared at him, at both of them. Her hands had stopped shaking, but her heart was doing something complicated in her chest. Some combination of terror and fury and a horrible creeping sense that she was about to make a decision that would define the rest of her life, however long that turned out to be. Why me? She asked. Why not set a trap somewhere else? Because they're coming here, Beck said. Because they told Helen Morrison they were. Because this ranch is isolated enough that no one will hear the gunfire, visible enough from the canyon that they'll think it's an easy target. Because you're alone, and they know it. And because, Brennan added, his eyes still on hers, we need someone who won't fall apart when it gets bad. We've seen your record, Mrs. Whitlock. You buried your husband and father in the same season and kept this place running. You rode into town 3 days after your father died to sell cattle because you needed the money. Most people would have collapsed. You didn't. Most people are smarter than me. Maybe. But we're not asking most people. The wind picked up outside, rattling the shutters. Mara could feel the weight of the rifle in her hands, the weight of the decision pressing down on her shoulders like bags of grain she couldn't lift. Every rational part of her brain was screaming to say no, to tell these 2 lunatics to get off her land and take their suicide mission with them. But there was another part, quieter and meaner, that was doing different math. If the gang came and she was alone, she'd die. That was almost certain. Maybe she'd get lucky and take one of them with her, but more likely she'd just die scared and alone with her land stolen out from under her corpse. If the gang came and these marshals were here, she'd probably still die. But there was a chance, slim, knife-thin, barely worth calling a chance, that she wouldn't, that they'd win, that she'd survive and the men who'd murdered Ed Morrison and his sons would be the ones in the ground instead. And if she ran, she'd be safe. Probably. But she'd also be exactly what everyone already thought she was. A girl playing at rancher, a widow who couldn't hack it, someone who took the first excuse to give up and go crawling back to civilization. She'd be proving her father right. What do you need me to do? She heard herself say. Beck let out a breath. Brennan's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Relief, maybe. Or respect. Or just the cold satisfaction of a man who'd gotten what he came for. Act normal, Beck said. Go about your business like nothing's changed. Work the ranch, go into town if you need to, keep the same routines. We'll be watching the approaches, staying out of sight. When they come, and they will come, you get inside the house and stay down. We'll handle the rest. What if they burn me out? They won't. Not at first. They'll want to search the house, take what they can carry. That's when we move. And if it goes wrong? No one answered that, because of course there was no good answer. If it went wrong, they'd all be dead, and it wouldn't matter who said what beforehand. Mara set the rifle down carefully, surprised her hands were steady. How long do I have? Could be tonight, could be 3 days. Our man will try to get word when they move, but he can't always manage it. So I just wait. You wait, Brennan confirmed. And you trust us. She almost laughed again. Trust. As if that was something she had lying around to give away to strangers who wanted to use her land as a killing floor. But what choice did she have, really? All right, she said. But if I die because of this, I'm haunting both of you. Fair enough, Beck said. He almost smiled. We'll take our gear to the barn, set up out of sight. You won't see us, but we'll be close. They turned to leave. Brennan paused at the edge of the porch, looked back at her with those hard, unreadable eyes. For what it's worth, Mrs. Whitlock, I don't think you're going to die. Why not? Because you're still angry, and angry people fight harder than scared ones. Then he was gone, following Beck toward the barn, leaving Mara alone with a rifle she couldn't shoot straight and a decision she couldn't take back. She stood in the doorway for a long time, watching them disappear into the barn with their saddlebags and their guns and their grim, practiced competence. The wind kept blowing, the sun kept arcing across the sky like it didn't know her world had just tilted on its axis. Eventually she went inside, picked up her father's coffee cup, and washed it clean. If she was going to die, she wasn't going to die living in a mess. The first day was the worst. Not because anything happened, nothing did, but because Mara couldn't stop waiting for something to happen. Every sound was a gunshot, every shadow was an outlaw. She burned breakfast because she was staring out the window instead of watching the pan. She spilled water because her hands were shaking again. She started 3 different chores and finished none of them because she couldn't focus long enough to remember what she'd been doing. By noon, she was ready to scream. By evening, she'd settled into a different kind of tension, the sort that made her muscles ache and her jaw hurt from clenching. She forced herself to eat dinner even though it tasted like ash. She sat at the table with her father's empty chair across from her, and Thomas's empty chair at the head, and tried not to think about how many empty chairs there were going to be by the time this was over. The Marshalls didn't come to the house. She saw them once, briefly, when she went to the barn to feed the horses. Brennan was up in the loft, barely visible in the shadows, his rifle across his knees. He nodded at her. She nodded back. Neither of them spoke. It felt like being watched by a ghost. That night she lay in bed with the rifle on the floor beside her, and the lamp turned low and listened to the house creak and settle around her. Every sound was magnified. The wind in the eaves, the scratch of branches against the window, her own breathing, too loud in the darkness. She didn't sleep. The second day was better, or maybe she was just getting used to the fear, the way you got used to cold water if you stayed in it long enough. She managed to finish the laundry, hang it to dry, bring it back in before the wind could tear it off the line. She mucked out the stalls and repaired a section of fence that had been sagging since before Thomas died. Normal things. Routine things. The kind of work that filled the hours and kept your hands busy and didn't leave room for thinking about all the ways you could die. Beck came to the house around midday, knocked quietly. Mara let him in, watched him scan the room with the automatic efficiency of someone who'd been ambushed before and didn't plan on being ambushed again. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Define all right." "No signs of movement? No visitors?" "Just you." He nodded. "Cole and I will take shifts watching the approaches. One of us will always be alert. If anything happens, if you see anything at all, fire a shot into the air. We'll come running." "What if they're already in the house by the time I fire?" "Then fire anyway. And get down." Helpful. He left as quietly as he'd come. Mara went back to her chores, went back to waiting, went back to the slow erosion of her nerves under the weight of anticipation. That night she slept for 3 hours, dreamed of fire, and woke up swinging at shadows. The third day broke cold and gray, the sky the color of old iron. Mara was drawing water from the well when she heard the horse. One horse, coming fast, from the direction of the canyon. She dropped the bucket, grabbed the rifle she'd started keeping within arm's reach, and ran for the house. Halfway there, she saw Brennan emerge from the barn at a dead run, Beck not far behind him. Both had their rifles up. The rider came into view, young, dirty, riding a horse that looked half dead from exhaustion. He saw the marshals and nearly fell off the saddle trying to stop. "They're coming," he gasped. "Hutchins and 6 others, moving out now. You've got maybe 2 hours before they're here." Beck grabbed the horse's bridle. "You sure?" "Heard them planning it. Tonight. Said the widow wouldn't even know what hit her." The young man's eyes found Mara, widened. "Ma'am, you need to run, right now. They're—" "She's staying," Brennan said flatly. "Get back to town. Fast. Don't stop. Don't talk to anyone until you're clear." The rider looked like he wanted to argue, took another look at Brennan's face, and decided against it. He wheeled his horse around and was gone, hoofbeats fading into the distance. Mara stood in the yard with the rifle clutched in white-knuckled hands and her heart trying to climb out through her throat. 2 hours. Maybe less. Beck was already moving, barking orders at Brennan, both of them falling into the practiced rhythm of men who'd done this before. Mara watched them for a moment, frozen, and then something inside her snapped into focus. 2 hours. She had 2 hours to prepare to die or to live or to do something in between. She went into the house, started moving furniture away from the windows. If they were going to shoot through the walls, she wanted hard cover, not just wood and hope. She loaded the rifle, checked it twice, set it by the door. She filled a bucket with water in case of fire. She put on her husband's old coat because it was thick and might stop a bullet. Probably wouldn't, but might. And because it smelled like him and she wanted that smell close if these were her last hours. Then she sat down at the kitchen table and waited. Outside, she could hear the marshals working. The creak of the barn door, low voices, terse and focused. The mechanical sounds of men preparing for violence. The minutes crawled past like wounded animals. An hour. Mara paced the house, checked the rifle again, looked out the windows at the empty yard and the empty road, and the mountains standing indifferent against the gray sky. 90 minutes. Her hands had stopped shaking. That was either a good sign or a terrible one. 2 hours. Nothing. Mara stood at the window, staring at the road, willing something to happen because the waiting was worse than anything else could possibly be. And then, in the distance, she saw dust rising. 7 riders, moving at an easy lope, not hurrying. Why would they hurry? As far as they knew, there was just one woman here, alone and unarmed and helpless. Mara's breath came short and sharp. Her hands found the rifle without her telling them to. Outside, everything had gone silent. The marshals were in position, waiting. The riders got closer. She could see them now, individual shapes resolving out of the dust. Hard men on hard horses, bristling with guns and cruelty. They were laughing. Something cold and mean settled into Mara's chest. Not fear, not anymore. Something worse. Something that felt like her father's stubbornness, and her husband's quiet strength, and her own bone-deep refusal to be a victim in a story she didn't write. The riders were 100 yards out now, 75, 50. They were slowing, fanning out, surrounding the house. Mara stepped back from the window, raised the rifle, and waited for the world to catch fire. The first shot came from the barn, not from the outlaws, from Brennan, a single crack that split the air and dropped the lead rider from his saddle like a puppet with cut strings. For one frozen second, everything stopped. The outlaws staring at their fallen leader, the riderless horse screaming and bolting. Mara's finger tight on the trigger, her whole body coiled like a spring. Then all hell opened up. The outlaws scattered, guns coming up, returning fire at targets they couldn't see. Bullets punched through the barn walls, thudded into the dirt, shattered the kitchen window above Mara's head and showered her with glass. She dropped, crawled toward better cover, her ears ringing from the gunfire. Another shot from the barn. Another outlaw down, this one clutching his shoulder and screaming. Beck's rifle, Mara thought distantly. Or maybe Brennan's. She'd lost track of who was where. The outlaws were adapting fast, too fast, diving off their horses and using them for cover, laying down suppressing fire that turned the barn into a splintered wreck. One of them was shouting orders, a tall man with a scarred face and a voice like gravel. Hutchins, probably. The leader Helen Morrison had described. "Burn them out!" he roared. "Torch the barn!" No. Mara didn't think, didn't plan. She just moved. Up to the window, rifle to her shoulder, squinting through the smoke and dust at the man fumbling with a torch, his back to her as he focused on the barn. She fired. The rifle kicked like a mule. She'd forgotten to brace properly, and the stock slammed into her shoulder hard enough to bring tears to her eyes. But the shot went wide anyway, kicking up dirt 3 feet to the left of her target. The man spun around, saw her in the window, and grinned. "There's the widow!" he shouted. "Just like they said! All alone and—" Brennan's rifle spoke again. The man went down without finishing the sentence, but now they knew she was in the house. And now they were angry. 2 outlaws broke toward the porch, firing as they came. Mara dropped below the windowsill, her heart hammering, trying to reload with hands that suddenly didn't want to work right. Bullets punched through the door, through the walls, through the shutters. The house was coming apart around her. She got the rifle loaded, came up, fired blind through the broken window. No idea if she hit anything. Didn't matter. Just needed to keep them back, keep them from reaching the door. A body hit the porch. Heavy boots. The door splintered inward. Mara brought the rifle around, but she was too slow, and the outlaw was already inside, his pistol coming up, his eyes meeting hers across 6 feet of space that might as well have been a mile. Time did something strange, stretched out. She could see the individual scratches on his gun barrel, the stubble on his jaw, the empty cruelty in his eyes that said he'd done this before and would do it again, and she was just another body in a long line of bodies. He was going to kill her. She knew it the way you know weather's changing, bone deep and certain. And then the world exploded. The outlaw's head snapped back, a red mist where his face had been. He dropped like a felled tree. Behind him, in the doorway, Brennan stood with his pistol smoking and his expression completely flat. Their eyes met. 1 second, 2. Then he was moving again, stepping over the body, grabbing Mara by the arm and hauling her toward the back of the house. "Stay low. They're regrouping." "What about Beck?" "He's pinned. North side. We need to flank them before they—" A window shattered in the back room. Glass and wood everywhere. Another outlaw coming through, this one younger, wild-eyed with fear or rage or both. He saw them and raised his rifle. Mara didn't freeze this time. She brought her rifle up, proper stance the way Thomas had taught her, shoulder braced, breath held, and fired. The shot took him in the chest. He staggered, fell backward through the broken window, and didn't get up. Mara stared at the space where he'd been, at the blood on her floor, at her hands still steady on the rifle. She'd killed a man. The thought was distant, clinical, like it was happening to someone else. "Good shot," Brennan said, and there was something in his voice she couldn't identify. Not quite approval, not quite surprise. Something in between. Then he was at the window, firing out at targets she couldn't see, and she was beside him, reloading mechanically, her mind gone quiet and strange and focused on nothing but the next shot, the next breath, the next second of staying alive. The gunfight raged for another 5 minutes that felt like 5 hours. Beck managed to get free from his position, came around the side of the house, and caught 2 outlaws in a crossfire with Brennan. They went down hard. Another tried to run for the horses, and Mara, who'd only hit a target twice in her life before today, dropped him at 40 yards with a shot that surprised her as much as it did him. And then suddenly, it was quiet. Not peaceful. Never peaceful. But quiet in the way a storm is quiet after it's passed, leaving only wreckage and shell shock in its wake. Mara lowered her rifle. Her hands were shaking again, violent tremors she couldn't control. Her shoulder was screaming where the rifle had kicked it. Her ears were ringing so loud she could barely hear Brennan when he spoke. "Is that all of them?" she asked. Her voice sounded wrong, thin and far away. Beck appeared in the doorway, limping, one hand pressed to his side. Blood leaked between his fingers. "5 down outside, 2 in here. That's 7. That's all of them." "You're shot," Mara said stupidly. "Grazed. I'll live." He looked around at the carnage, at the bodies, at the bullet-riddled walls of her home. "Hell of a thing." Brennan was checking the bodies, making sure they were actually dead and not just playing possum. Professional, thorough. He moved like violence was a language he spoke fluently. Mara stood in the ruins of her kitchen and tried to remember how to breathe normally. She'd stayed, she'd fought, and somehow, impossibly, she was still alive. The gang was dead. The threat was over, and she had no idea what happened next. Beck collapsed into the chair by the table, his hand still pressed to his side, blood seeping dark and slow between his fingers. Mara grabbed a clean dish towel, one of the last clean things left in the house, and pressed it against the wound before he could protest. "Let me see it," she said. "It's nothing." "You're bleeding through your shirt. That's not nothing." He lifted his hand reluctantly, and she peeled back the fabric, wincing at what she found. A furrow along his ribs, deep enough to matter, but not deep enough to kill him if they got it cleaned and wrapped. She'd seen worse on ranch hands who'd tangled with barbed wire, but never one made by a bullet. "You're lucky," she said, already moving toward the cabinet where she kept the medical supplies. What was left of them, anyway. "Don't feel lucky," Beck muttered, but he didn't fight her when she came back with bandages and whiskey. Brennan was still outside, doing something with the bodies. Mara tried not to think about what that something was. She focused on Beck instead, on cleaning the wound with whiskey that made him hiss through his teeth, on wrapping it tight enough to hold, but not so tight he couldn't breathe. Her hands were steadier than they should have been. Maybe shock. Maybe the simple fact that this was a problem she could solve, unlike all the other problems currently surrounding her like wolves. "You did good," Beck said quietly as she worked. "Better than good. Most civilians would have frozen up or run. You didn't. Didn't have much choice. There's always a choice. You chose right." Mara tied off the bandage and stepped back, surveying her work. Not perfect, but it would hold. "How long before you can ride?" "I can ride now if I have to." "That's not what I asked." "Tomorrow morning," he admitted. "Maybe the day after. Depends on how much it bleeds." The door opened and Brennan came in, his boots tracking blood across the floor that was already streaked with it. He looked at Beck, at the bandages, and something passed between the two men that Mara couldn't read. "All accounted for," Brennan said. 7 bodies. Hutchins is dead. So's his lieutenant. The rest were hired guns, no names I recognize." "Any survivors?" "No." The word hung there, flat and final. Mara thought about the young one she'd shot, the one who'd come through the back window. Thought about his eyes, wide and shocked, the second before he fell. She waited for guilt to hit her, for remorse, for something that felt like what civilized people were supposed to feel when they killed another human being. It didn't come. Maybe it would later. Maybe it wouldn't come at all. Right now, all she felt was tired and wired at the same time, her body humming with leftover adrenaline that had nowhere to go. "What do we do with them?" she asked. "Bring them to town," Beck said. "Let the sheriff document everything. Send word to the territorial marshal's office. There'll be questions, paperwork, probably a hearing of some kind." "And me?" "You were defending your property, with witnesses." He gestured at Brennan. "Federal witnesses at that. You'll be fine." Fine. As if fine was something that existed anymore. Mara looked around her kitchen, what was left of it. Bullet holes in the walls, shattered windows, blood on the floor, some of it from the dead outlaws, and some of it from Beck, and all of it mixing together into dark pools that would stain the wood forever. The door hung crooked on its hinges. The table had a gouge in it where a bullet had carved through. Her father's chair had a hole in the back. Everything was broken. "I need air," she said, and walked out before either marshal could respond. The yard wasn't much better. Dead horses, dead men. Brennan had dragged most of the bodies away from the immediate area around the house, lined them up like cordwood by the barn. Respectful enough, she supposed, for men who'd come here to kill her. The sky was starting to darken, the sun sinking toward the mountains in a wash of orange and red that looked like the world was bleeding out. Mara stood in the middle of her wrecked yard and tried to remember what peace felt like. Couldn't do it. That version of herself felt like someone she'd known a long time ago, in a different life. Brennan came out of the house, moved to stand a few feet away, close enough to talk, far enough to give her space. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there with her while the light failed and the temperature dropped and the reality of what had happened settled over them like snow. "First time?" he asked finally. She didn't need to ask what he meant. "Yes." "It gets easier." "Does it?" "No, but you learn to live with it." She looked at him then, really looked at him. His face was hard in the fading light, all angles and shadows. There was blood on his shirt collar. Not his blood, she thought. His hands were steady. His expression was unreadable. This was just another day for him. Another fight, another set of bodies, another mess to clean up before moving on to the next one. "How many men have you killed?" she asked. He didn't flinch from the question. "Enough that I stopped counting. Most of them needed killing. Some of them probably didn't, but they drew on me anyway, and I'm still here and they're not." "That's supposed to make me feel better?" "No. It's supposed to make you understand that what happened here wasn't about good and evil. It was about survival. They came to take your land and probably your life. You stopped them. That's all it is." "That's all?" "That's all," he said quietly. "The rest of it, the guilt, the justification, the wondering if you could have done something different, that's just noise. It'll eat you alive if you let it." Mara turned away, stared at the mountains going purple in the dusk. "I don't feel guilty." "Good. I feel angry." "Even better. Angry keeps you sharp." "And what happens when the anger runs out?" Brennan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, rougher. "Then you find something else to hold on to. A reason, a person, a piece of land worth keeping." He paused. "You already did the hard part." "Which part?" "Deciding to stay." They stood there as full dark came on, and eventually Mara went back inside to start cleaning up the blood. The next morning came gray and cold, the kind of cold that got into your bones and wouldn't leave. Mara woke on the floor by the fireplace where she'd eventually collapsed, sometime after midnight, her body one solid ache from shoulder to ankles. The rifle was still in her hands. She didn't remember falling asleep holding it, but apparently some part of her brain had decided that was necessary. Beck was asleep in her father's chair, snoring softly. Brennan was awake, sitting by the broken window with his own rifle across his knees, watching the road. He glanced over when she stirred but didn't speak. Mara got up, wincing at the protest from muscles she'd apparently discovered through violence, and went to start coffee. The routine of it helped. Water from the bucket, grounds from the tin, fire coaxed back to life in the stove. Simple things, manageable things. "You should have woken me for a shift," she said to Brennan. "You needed sleep more than we needed 3 sets of eyes. Still nothing. You did enough yesterday." The coffee boiled and she poured 3 cups, brought one to Brennan, and left one by Beck's elbow. Kept the third for herself and wrapped her hands around it like it was the only warm thing left in the world. "When do we go to town?" she asked. "This afternoon, probably. Give Beck some time to rest, let the horses recover. It'll take most of the day to get all the bodies loaded anyway." "What about the ones from inside?" "Already moved them, while you were sleeping." She took a sip of coffee, burned her tongue, didn't care. "I should thank you. Both of you. You saved my life." "You saved Beck's," Brennan said. "That shot through the back window, the one you took. That man was flanking around to Beck's position. You stopped him." "I didn't know that." "Doesn't matter. You still did it." Beck stirred, opened one eye, spotted the coffee and reached for it like a drowning man reaching for rope. He took a long drink, made a sound of contentment, and opened the other eye. "We still alive?" "For now," Brennan said. "Good enough." He looked at Mara. "How you holding up?" "I've been better. I've been worse." "That's the spirit." He took another drink of coffee, grimaced as the movement pulled at his ribs. "We need to talk about what happens next." "I thought we were going to town." "After that. The gang's dead, but this ranch is still isolated and you're still alone. Word's going to spread about what happened here. Some people will see it as a victory. Others will see it as an opportunity." Mara felt something cold settle in her stomach. "You think more will come?" "I think you just became famous in a territory where being famous gets you noticed by people you don't want noticing you. So yes, maybe not immediately, maybe not for months, but eventually." "So what am I supposed to do? Hire guards I can't afford, sell and run?" "You could come to town," Beck offered. "Stay at the boarding house for a while. Let things settle." "And let the ranch fall apart while I'm gone? Livestock needs tending. Fences need mending. There's 100 things that'll go to hell inside a week if no one's here." "Better than being dead." "Is it?" She set her cup down harder than she meant to, coffee sloshing over the rim. "I didn't stay here and fight just to give up the land anyway. If I wanted to do that, I would have left when you first showed up." Beck and Brennan exchanged another one of those looks that made Mara want to throw something at both of them. What? She demanded. Nothing, Beck said. Just, you remind me of someone. Who? My wife. Before she passed. Same stubbornness, same refusal to bend. He smiled, but it was sad around the edges. Drove me crazy. Also kept her alive through things that should have killed her. What happened to her? Cholera. 10 years ago. Nothing to fight, nothing to shoot, just sickness and bad luck. He took another sip of coffee. Point is, I understand not wanting to give up what's yours, but stubbornness only works if you live long enough for it to matter. I'll hire help, Mara said. A ranch hand, someone who can shoot. With what money? She didn't have an answer for that. The cattle sale had kept her afloat, but there wasn't much left after settling her father's debts. Hiring someone meant feeding someone, paying someone, trusting someone, all things she wasn't sure she could manage. Brennan stood, set his rifle down, and crossed to the stove to refill his coffee. I could stay. Both Mara and Beck stared at him. What? Mara said. I could stay, for a while. Help you get the place back in order, keep an eye on things. Make sure no one else gets ideas about easy targets. You're a federal marshal. On temporary leave, he corrected. I've got 2 months coming to me. Haven't taken a day off in 3 years. Beck can cover my duties. Beck looked like he'd been hit in the head with a board. Cole, what the hell? You said it yourself. She can't stay here alone, and she's not leaving, so someone needs to stay with her. He looked at Mara. Unless you object. Mara opened her mouth, closed it. Her brain was doing something complicated, trying to figure out if this was a genuine offer or a trap or some kind of obligation born out of guilt. Brennan's expression gave away nothing. He just stood there, waiting for an answer, like he'd offered to help fix a fence instead of upending his life to babysit a widow he'd known for 3 days. Why? She asked finally. Because you fought when you could have run. Because you're trying to hold on to something that matters. And because, he paused, something shifting in his eyes. Because I'm tired of watching good people lose to bad ones. The silence stretched out. Beck was shaking his head but not saying no. Mara was trying to decide if she was insulted or relieved or some combination of both. I can't pay you much, she said. Don't need much. The work's hard. Ranching isn't lawing. I grew up on a ranch. I know what it takes. And when your 2 months are up, then I leave and you hire someone else. Or don't. That's your call. Mara looked at him. At Beck, who had stopped shaking his head and now just looked resigned. At the broken window and the blood-stained floor and the bullet holes in the walls. At the choice in front of her that wasn't really a choice because what were the alternatives? Stay alone and wait for the next threat. Leave and lose everything. Or accept help from a stranger who'd already proven he could keep her alive. All right, she said, but you're fixing that door first thing. Something that might have been a smile flickered across Brennan's face and was gone. Yes, ma'am. Beck let out a long breath. You're both crazy. Probably, Mara agreed. They loaded the bodies onto a wagon that afternoon, grim work made worse by the fact that death didn't wait politely for convenient timing. The outlaws had been dead for almost 24 hours in cold weather, which helped some, but not enough. Mara helped where she could and tried not to look at their faces. Tried not to think about the fact that she'd put bullets in 2 of them. It took hours. By the time they finished, the sun was already sinking and Beck was gray around the edges, his wound obviously bothering him more than he wanted to admit. We'll leave at first light, he said. Get to town by midday, get this documented, get it done. What about me? Mara asked. You should come. Give your statement while it's fresh. And leave the ranch unguarded? Beck looked at Brennan, who was checking the wagon rigging. He'll be here. I don't like leaving him alone. I can handle alone, Brennan said without looking up. Go to town, clear your name. Come back when it's done. Mara wanted to argue, but couldn't think of a good reason. He was right. She needed to go, needed to get ahead of whatever story was going to spread, needed to make sure the official record showed her as the victim and not some kind of outlaw sympathizer who'd gotten caught in crossfire. Fine, she said. But if anything happens, nothing's going to happen. The gang's dead. Everyone who'd be interested in this place is currently piled on that wagon. He was probably right, probably. They ate a cold dinner because no one had the energy to cook, and then Beck retreated to the chair again to rest. Mara tried to sleep and couldn't, her mind racing through everything that had happened and everything that hadn't happened yet. Eventually she gave up and went outside, found Brennan sitting on the porch steps with his rifle and a cigarette. "Thought marshals didn't smoke on duty," she said. "I'm on leave, remember?" She sat down next to him, not too close, and watched the smoke curl up into the darkness. The stars were out, sharp and cold and indifferent. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. "I know." "So why are you?" He took a long drag, let the smoke out slow. "You ever have something you needed to prove? Not to anyone else, to yourself." "Every day since my husband died." "Then you understand." "Not really. What do you need to prove?" He was quiet for a long time, long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, that I can do something other than kill people and call it justice. That I can build something instead of just burning things down and moving on. "You've been a marshal for how long?" 12 years. "That's a long time to realize you don't like the work." "I like the work fine. I'm good at it. But that's the problem. I'm too good at it. It's become all I am." He flicked ash off the cigarette. "My brother runs a farm in Kansas, got married last year, has a kid on the way. Wrote me a letter asking when I was going to settle down, stop chasing ghosts, live a normal life. I didn't have an answer. And you think 2 months on a half-destroyed ranch in Montana is going to give you one? Maybe. Or maybe it'll just give me time to figure out what the question is." Mara pulled her coat tighter against the cold. "Fair warning, I'm not looking for a husband, or a partner, or whatever other ideas you might have." "Good. Because I'm not offering to be one." "Then what are you offering?" "Help. Just help. Nothing more complicated than that." She believed him. Or wanted to. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. They sat there until the cigarette burned down to nothing and the cold got too much to ignore. Then they went inside, Brennan to his watch and Mara to another failed attempt at sleep. The ride to town took 6 hours with the wagon loaded, Beck grimacing every time they hit a rut. Mara drove while Brennan rode alongside, his eyes never quite settling, always scanning the horizon for threats that didn't materialize. The bodies shifted and settled in the wagon bed with sounds that made Mara's stomach turn. The town was called Elkhorn, though as far as Mara knew, there hadn't been elk in the area for 20 years. It was small and getting smaller, the kind of place people passed through on their way to somewhere better. One main street, a handful of stores, a saloon that doubled as a hotel, and a sheriff's office that looked like it had been built during the previous administration and not maintained since. The sheriff was a man named Garrett, 60 if he was a day, with a gut that strained his vest buttons and eyes that had seen enough that nothing much surprised him anymore. He took one look at the wagon and let out a low whistle. "Heard there was trouble out at the Whitlock place," he said. "Didn't expect this much trouble." "The Hutchins gang," Beck said, dismounting with a grunt. "All of them. They hit Mrs. Whitlock's ranch yesterday. We were waiting." Garrett's eyes moved to Mara. "You all right, ma'am?" "I'm alive." "That's something." He looked at the bodies, at Beck's bandaged ribs, at Brennan's flat expression. "I'm going to need statements from all of you, detailed ones. And we'll need to send word to the territorial marshal. Let him know his most wanted gang just got themselves killed." "I'll write the report," Beck said. "But I need a doctor first." "Clara Simmons runs the clinic, 2 doors down. Tell her I sent you." Beck nodded and headed off, moving like every step hurt. Garrett gestured for Mara and Brennan to follow him into the office, a cramped space that smelled like old paper and older coffee. They spent the next 3 hours going over every detail. What the gang had done, when the marshals had arrived, how the ambush was planned, who shot who. Mara's hand started shaking again, somewhere around the part where she described killing the young outlaw through the back window, but she kept talking, kept getting it all out. The truth laid bare on Garrett's desk in words that sounded too small for what they were describing. When it was done, Garrett sat back and rubbed his face. "Hell of a thing. You did the territory a favor, all 3 of you. Hutchins and his boys have been terrorizing this area for months. A lot of people will sleep better knowing they're gone." "Will there be charges?" Mara asked. "Against you?" "No, ma'am. This was clear self-defense, defense of property. You had federal marshals as witnesses. If anything, you'll probably get a commendation from the territorial governor." He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "You're a hero, Mrs. Whitlock." "I don't feel like a hero." "Heroes usually don't." They left the office as the sun was starting to set, the town settling into its evening rhythms. Beck was waiting outside the clinic, looking marginally better, his ribs rewrapped by someone who actually knew what they were doing. "Doctor says I'll live," he reported. "Said I should rest for a week. I told her that wasn't happening." "You should listen to her," Mara said. "I'll rest when I'm dead. Right now I need to send telegrams, file reports, make sure this gets documented properly before some bureaucrat decides it didn't happen the way we said it did." "Always more paperwork," Brennan said. "Always." Beck clapped him on the shoulder, winced. "You take care of the widow. I'll handle the rest." "She's not the widow," Brennan said quietly. "She's Mara." Beck's eyebrows went up, but he didn't comment. Just nodded and headed toward the telegraph office. Mara and Brennan walked back to where they'd left the horses. The street was quieter now, most people inside having dinner or drinks or whatever normal people did in the evening when they weren't dealing with dead outlaws and federal investigations. "You hungry?" Brennan asked. Mara realized she was, starving actually. They'd left before breakfast and it was now well past dinner. "Yes." "Saloon serves food, nothing fancy, but it's hot." They ate beef stew and bread that was only slightly stale, sitting at a corner table where Brennan could watch the door and Mara could sit with her back to the wall. The food helped, warm and filling and uncomplicated. Around them, the saloon hummed with conversation and laughter, the normal sounds of people living normal lives. Mara felt like an alien observing a different species. "You get used to it," Brennan said, reading her expression. "The feeling like you don't fit anymore. Takes time, but it passes." "How much time?" "Depends on the person. For me, after my first gunfight, about 3 months. For some people, never." "Comforting." Wasn't trying to be comforting, just honest. They finished eating and Brennan paid, waving off her attempt to contribute. Outside, the temperature had dropped and the stars were coming out. The same indifferent stars that had watched everything happen and would keep watching long after they were all dust. "We should head back," Mara said. "It's a long ride in the dark." "We could stay. There's rooms above the saloon. Leave at first light. Be back by afternoon." She thought about it. About the prospect of sleeping in a real bed instead of on the floor of her shot-up house. About the appeal of one more night before going back to face the reality of everything that needed fixing. "All right," she said, "but separate rooms." Wasn't suggesting otherwise. The rooms were small and spare but clean, and the bed was better than the floor by a significant margin. Mara lay in the darkness and listened to the sounds of the saloon below, voices and music bleeding up through the floorboards. She thought about Thomas, wondered what he would have made of all this. Her father would have been furious that she'd stayed, would have called her foolish and reckless and every other word for stupid he could think of. But they were both gone, and she was still here. And tomorrow she'd go back to the ranch with a federal marshal who'd decided to play ranch hand for reasons she didn't fully understand, and she'd start putting the pieces back together, and she'd keep going because that's what you did when the alternative was giving up. She fell asleep thinking about broken windows and wondering if Brennan actually knew how to fix a door. They rode back in the morning with the sun barely clearing the mountains, frost still clinging to the grass in stubborn patches. Beck had stayed behind to finish his reports and recuperate, which left just Mara and Brennan making the journey. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but it wasn't easy either. It was the silence of two people who'd survived something violent together and didn't quite know what to do with each other now that the violence had passed. The ranch looked worse in daylight. Mara had known it would, but knowing didn't make it easier. Bullet holes everywhere, splintered wood, dark stains in the dirt where bodies had bled out. The door hung at an angle that made the whole house look drunk. Brennan dismounted and stood there taking it all in, his expression unreadable. Then he rolled up his sleeves and said, "Tools in the barn?" "Some. Not much. My husband wasn't big on repairs." "What was he big on?" "Cattle. And dying young, apparently." Brennan looked at her, something flickering in his eyes that might have been sympathy or might have been understanding. "I'll work with what's there. You got nails?" A few pounds, maybe. That'll do for a start. He spent the rest of the morning on the door, pulling it off the broken hinges, planing down the edges where bullets had chewed through the wood, fitting new hardware that he scavenged from an old gate. Mara watched him work for a while, surprised by how competent he was. His hands moved with the kind of efficiency that came from doing something 1,000 times before. She left him to it and went to deal with the windows. Most of the glass was beyond saving, shattered into pieces too small to be useful. She boarded up what she could with scrap lumber from the barn, knowing it was temporary but better than nothing. The house would be dark now, cave-like, but at least the wind wouldn't cut through it like a knife. By noon, they were both filthy and tired and hadn't spoken more than a dozen words to each other. Mara made coffee and sandwiches from the last of the bread, and they ate sitting on the porch steps like they had the night before the world had caught fire. "Door's not pretty, but it'll hold," Brennan said around a mouthful of bread. That's more than it was doing before. "Windows will need actual glass. I can ride to town tomorrow, pick some up if you've got the money for it. I've got enough for windows. Barely." He nodded, chewing thoughtfully. "What else needs doing?" "What doesn't?" Mara gestured vaguely at the ranch. "Fences are half down in the north pasture. Haven't been checked in weeks. Cattle need moving to fresh grazing. The barn roof leaks in 3 places. The henhouse door doesn't close right, and we're losing chickens to something, fox probably. The well pump sticks. All right, he held up a hand. "I get it. We'll make a list." "A list won't fix anything." "No, but it'll tell us what order to fix things in. Can't do everything at once." Mara wanted to argue, but couldn't find the energy. He was right, and she knew it. The ranch had been sliding toward ruin even before the shootout, held together by stubbornness and prayer, and not much else. Now it needed actual work, the kind that took time and effort and 2 functioning hands. They spent the afternoon on the fences, riding out to the north pasture where the posts had rotted and the wire had gone slack. It was mindless work, the kind that let your brain drift while your body stayed busy. Dig out the old post, set a new one, string the wire tight, move to the next section, over and over until your back ached and your hands were raw. Brennan worked without complaint, falling into the rhythm like he'd been doing it all his life, which, Mara supposed, he probably had at some point. He'd mentioned growing up on a ranch. She wondered what had happened to make him leave it for a marshal's badge and a life of chasing killers across the territory. "You ever think about going back?" she asked as they were setting a particularly stubborn post. "Back where?" "Your family's ranch, Kansas, you said." He drove the post down with 3 sharp blows from the mallet, tested it, nodded. "Sometimes. Usually when I'm cold and tired and wondering why I'm doing this instead of something sensible." "What stops you?" "Pride, mostly. I left on bad terms, told my father ranching was a slow death, and I wanted something that mattered. He told me I was an idiot and slammed the door in my face." Brennan moved to the next post hole, started digging. "Turned out we were both right. Ranching is a slow death, but so is everything else, just at different speeds." "You could write to him, tell him you were wrong." "I wasn't wrong, just young and stupid. There's a difference." "Is there?" He looked at her over the shovel, something shifting in his expression. "You ever leave on bad terms with someone and then they died before you could fix it?" Mara thought about her father, about the promises she'd made and broken, about the disappointment in his eyes when he realized she wasn't going to sell the ranch and leave like he'd wanted. "Yes." "Then you know why I don't write." They finished the fences as the sun was starting to set, both of them too tired to do much more than stumble back to the house and collapse. Mara made beans and bacon for dinner, nothing fancy, but it was hot and filling. They ate in silence again, the quiet stretching out between them like wire. After dinner, Brennan went to check on the horses while Mara cleaned up. When he came back, he had his rifle and that look on his face that meant he was settling in for watch duty. "You can't stay up all night every night," Mara said. "You'll kill yourself." "I'll sleep when you're awake." "I'm awake now." "Then I'll sleep later." He settled into the chair by the window, the same spot he'd occupied since the first night. "Go to bed, Mara. I've got this." She wanted to argue, but her body had other ideas. Exhaustion hit her like a physical weight, dragging her down. She made it to her bedroom, didn't bother changing out of her clothes, and was asleep before her head fully hit the pillow. The days that followed blurred together into a routine of work and exhaustion and slow, incremental progress. Brennan rode to town and came back with glass for the windows, real glass that let light back into the house and made it feel less like a tomb. They fixed the barn roof, patched the hen house, moved the cattle to fresh pasture. They worked from sunup to sundown and sometimes past it, falling into bed too tired to think about anything except the next day's list of tasks. It should have been awkward, living with a man she barely knew. Should have been uncomfortable, but somehow it wasn't. Brennan kept to himself mostly, gave her space, didn't push into areas she didn't invite him. He slept in the barn loft even though she'd offered him her father's room. He cooked his own meals half the time and cleaned up after himself. He was there without being intrusive, present without being demanding. It was strange how quickly she got used to having him around. 2 weeks in, she found him in the barn trying to fix a broken harness, cursing quietly at the leather that wouldn't cooperate. She watched from the doorway for a minute, then said, "You're doing it wrong." He looked up, one eyebrow raised. "That's so." "Here." She took the harness from him, showed him the trick Thomas had taught her, how to work the leather so it bent instead of cracking. Their hands brushed in the exchange, and she pulled back quickly, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. Brennan noticed, stepped back. "Thanks." "You're welcome." An awkward pause. Then Mara turned to leave and he said, "You never talk about him." She stopped. "Who?" "Your husband." "What's there to talk about?" "He's dead." "That's not what I asked." Mara turned back around, feeling something sharp and defensive rising in her chest. "What do you want to know? That we were happy?" "We were." "That I loved him?" "I did." "That I miss him?" "Every single day." "That I'd give anything to have him back?" "I would, but I can't, so what's the point in talking about it?" Brennan held up his hands. "No point. Just seemed like maybe you needed to." "I don't need anything except to keep this ranch from falling apart." "All right." "All right?" "All right," he repeated, calmer than she deserved. "I'm not trying to dig into places you don't want dug into. Just offering if you need it." Mara felt the anger drain out of her as quickly as it had come, leaving her tired and slightly ashamed. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to snap." "Yes, you did. It's fine. I've been snapped at worse by better." Despite everything, she almost smiled. "You have a real talent for saying things that sound like compliments but aren't." "One of my many gifts." This time she did smile, just a little. Then she left him to his harness and went to start dinner, feeling off balance in a way she couldn't quite name. That night after they ate, Brennan asked, "You play cards?" "Some." "Why?" "Because we've been working ourselves half to death for 2 weeks, and neither of us has done anything that wasn't strictly necessary. Seems like maybe we could use an hour of not being quite so grim about everything." Mara looked at him, at the deck of cards in his hands, at the almost hopeful expression on his face that he was trying very hard to hide. "What are we playing for?" "Matches, unless you've got money you want to lose." "I don't have money to lose. Or to win." "Matches it is, then." They played poker at the kitchen table by lamplight, and Mara was terrible at it. Not because she didn't know the rules, but because apparently her face gave away everything she was thinking. Brennan took pity on her after the first 3 hands and started giving her pointers, which was how she figured out he was cheating. "You're dealing from the bottom," she said, pointing at his hands. "Am not." "R2. I saw you." "Prove it." She grabbed the deck from him and found the card she knew he'd palmed, held it up triumphantly. "This is proof." Brennan grinned, the first real grin she'd seen from him, and it transformed his whole face. Made him look younger, almost boyish. "Fine. You caught me. What are you going to do about it?" "Demand a rematch. With a new deck." "Don't have a new deck." "Then I guess you're going to have to lose on purpose to make it fair." "Not a chance." They played until midnight, arguing and laughing and forgetting for a few hours that the world outside was hard and unforgiving. When Mara finally called it quits, down about 40 matches and not caring, she realized she felt lighter than she had in months, maybe since before Thomas died. "Thank you," she said as she was getting up to go to bed. "For what?" "For this. For not letting everything be about survival." Brennan gathered up the cards, his expression going serious again. "Survival's important, but so is living. Can't do one without the other." She left him there and went to sleep thinking about the difference between surviving and living and wondering if maybe she'd been doing only one for too long. The fourth week brought trouble of a different kind. Mara was in the henhouse gathering eggs when she heard horses. Multiple horses, coming fast. Her first thought was outlaws. Her second thought was the rifle she'd left in the house. Her third thought was get to Brennan. To quote, she dropped the eggs and ran. Brennan was already coming out of the barn, rifle in hand, his whole body tense and ready. They met in the yard just as 3 riders came around the bend, and Mara's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear over it. Then she recognized the lead rider, and the fear shifted into something more complicated. Marcus Whitaker, her father's brother, her uncle, though they hadn't spoken in 5 years. He pulled up short when he saw them, his eyes going from Mara to Brennan and back again. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and heavy through the middle, with a beard going gray and eyes that held too much judgment. "Marasha," he said, not bothering to dismount. "Marcus. Heard you had some excitement out here. Wanted to come see for myself that you were all right." "I'm fine." "So I see." His gaze shifted to Brennan again, lingering. "And who's this?" "Deputy Marshal Cole Brennan," Brennan said before Mara could answer. "I helped deal with the gang that attacked Mrs. Whitlock's property." "Helped deal with?" That's one way to put it. Marcus finally dismounted. His 2 companions, ranch hands from his place, Mara recognized, staying on their horses. "Heard you killed 7 men. That true?" "They needed killing," Mara said flatly. "I'm sure they did. I'm also sure your father would have had a fit seeing you mixed up in that kind of violence." "My father's dead, so's my husband. So I made my own decisions." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Decisions that include having a strange man living on your property? That what we're calling appropriate now?" Mara felt her temper flare. "Marshal Brennan is helping me repair the ranch, that's all. And even if it wasn't, it's none of your business." "It's my business when my brother's legacy is involved. This ranch should have been sold months ago. Should have gone to family who could actually manage it instead of a girl playing at ranching." Brennan moved just slightly, but enough that he was now standing closer to Mara. His voice when he spoke was quiet and very, very dangerous. "I'd be real careful with what you say next, Mr. Whitaker." Marcus looked at him, something calculating in his eyes. "Or what? You going to shoot me too? Add me to your count?" "Marcus," Mara said, her voice shaking with rage, "get off my land. I'm trying to help you, trying to offer you a way out before you get yourself killed or worse. I'll buy the ranch from you fair price, and you can go back east where you should have gone in the first place." "No." "Mara, no, this ranch is mine. My husband left it to me. My father's buried here. I'm not selling, not to you, not to anyone. So you can take your offer and your judgment and get out." Marcus stood there for a long moment, his face reddening. Then he turned to his men. "Let's go. Can't help someone who won't be helped." He mounted up, but before he left he looked down at Mara with something that might have been pity or might have been disgust. "When this falls apart, and it will, don't come crying to me. Wouldn't dream of it." They rode off, and Mara stood there trembling with leftover adrenaline and fury. Brennan stayed quiet beside her until the hoofbeats had faded completely. "Family?" he asked finally. "Unfortunately." "Want to talk about it?" "Not even a little bit." "Fair enough." He started back toward the barn, then paused. "For what it's worth, you handled that better than I would have." "How would you have handled it?" "Probably would have shot him." Mara surprised herself by laughing, sharp and bitter, but still a laugh. Tempting. "Wouldn't recommend it. Paperwork's terrible." That night Mara couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling and thinking about Marcus's words, about her father's disappointment, about all the ways she was apparently failing at a life she was barely managing to live. When she finally gave up on sleep and went to the kitchen for water, she found Brennan sitting at the table in the dark. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. "Sleeping's overrated." She sat down across from him, both of them just shapes in the darkness. "He's wrong, you know, Marcus. I'm not playing at this. I know what I'm doing." "I know." "Do you, or are you just being polite?" Brennan leaned forward, his face catching just enough moonlight that she could see his expression. It was serious, honest. I've seen people play at ranching. They last maybe 6 months before they give up and move on. You've lasted longer than that already, through circumstances that would have broken most people. You're not playing. You're fighting, and you're winning, even if it doesn't feel like it. It doesn't feel like winning. It never does when you're in the middle of it, but you're still here. The ranch is still standing. The cattle are still alive. That's winning. Mara looked at him across the darkness and felt something shift in her chest, something dangerous and complicated. Why are you really here, Brennan? I told you. No, the real reason. Not the one about proving something to yourself, the real one. He was quiet for so long she thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally did, his voice was rough. Because I'm tired of losing people. Tired of showing up too late or not at all. Tired of making a career out of avenging the dead instead of protecting the living. And when I saw you standing in that yard with a rifle you could barely shoot, ready to die for a piece of land because it was all you had left. He stopped, shook his head. I couldn't walk away. Didn't want to. That's a terrible reason to upend your life. Probably, but it's the truth. They sat there in the darkness, the weight of honesty hanging between them like smoke. Mara should have been uncomfortable, should have been wary. Instead, she just felt seen in a way she hadn't been since Thomas died. I'm glad you stayed, she said quietly. Me too. The moment stretched out, fragile and tentative, and then Mara stood up. We should try to sleep. Morning comes early. Always does. She went back to her room and lay in bed thinking about second chances and the different shapes they came in. Thinking about a federal marshal who decided to play ranch hand because he was tired of losing people. Thinking about how sometimes the things that saved you weren't the things you'd been looking for at all. This time when she slept, she didn't dream of fire. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of work and slow progress and moments of unexpected comfort. The ranch started to look less like a disaster and more like something salvageable. The fences held, the cattle thrived, the bullet holes got patched and painted over until you had to know where to look to see them. Brennan and Mara fell into an easy partnership, the kind that didn't require much talking. They worked side by side, ate meals together, played cards in the evenings when they weren't too exhausted. They didn't talk about what came after, when his 2 months were up and he had to leave. That felt too big, too complicated. Easier to just focus on the day in front of them and let the future take care of itself. But the future had its own ideas. Mara was in town picking up supplies when she ran into Helen Morrison. The older woman had recovered enough to move into a small house on the edge of town, helped by neighbors and the Territorial Relief Fund. She looked better than the last time Mara had seen her, less haunted, though the shadows were still there in her eyes. Mrs. Whitlock, Helen said, catching her outside the general store. I've been meaning to come see you, to thank you. For what? For stopping them. For making sure they couldn't hurt anyone else. I know it doesn't bring my Ed back or my boys, but knowing they're gone, it helps. A little. Mara didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to explain that she hadn't been thinking about justice or helping anyone when she'd fought. She'd just been trying to survive. I'm glad it helps, she managed finally. How are you holding up? I heard you've got one of the marshals staying on to help with the ranch. For a while, yes. Helen's eyes got a knowing look. He seems like a good man. He is. And handsome, too. Mara felt her face heat. We're not... Oh, honey, I'm not judging. After what you've been through, you deserve whatever happiness you can find. Don't let people like Marcus Whitaker tell you different. You heard about that? Everyone's heard about that. Man made a fool of himself. You just keep doing what you're doing. Keep fighting for what's yours. They parted ways and Mara finished her shopping in a daze, Helen's words echoing in her head. Whatever happiness you can find. As if happiness was something she was allowed to look for instead of just something that happened to other people. She rode back to the ranch thinking about Brennan, about the way he'd looked at her across the table in the darkness, about all the things neither of them had said, about time running out and choices she wasn't sure she was ready to make. When she got home, Brennan was on the porch waiting. One look at his face, and she knew something had happened. What? She asked, dismounting quickly. Telegram from Beck. He held up the paper. My leave's almost up. I need to report back to the territorial office in 2 weeks. 2 weeks. 14 days. Not nearly enough time. All right, Mara said, trying to keep her voice steady. Then we'd better make them count. They didn't talk about it. Not that night, not the next day. They just worked harder, faster, like cramming 3 months of repairs into 2 weeks would somehow make the leaving easier. It wouldn't. Mara knew it wouldn't, but she threw herself into the work anyway because what else was there to do? The north fence line needed replacing entirely, not just patching. They spent 3 days on it, digging post holes until Mara's hands blistered and then bled through the blisters. Brennan tried to take the shovel from her twice, and she'd snapped at him both times, sharp enough that he'd backed off with his hands raised. Just trying to help, he'd said. I don't need help. I need to get this done. He'd looked at her for a long moment, something sad in his eyes, but he'd picked up his own shovel and kept working. On the 4th day, a storm rolled in from the west, the kind that turned the sky black and the air electric. They barely made it back to the house before the rain hit, great sheets of it that hammered the roof and turned the yard to mud within minutes. Thunder rolled across the mountains like artillery fire. Mara stood at the window watching it come down, her wet clothes clinging to her skin, her hair plastered to her face. She was shaking, but not from cold. From something else. Something that had been building for days and had nowhere to go. Brennan came to stand beside her, equally soaked. You all right? No? Want to talk about it? What's there to talk about? You're leaving. The ranch still needs work. I still can't afford to hire anyone. Everything goes back to how it was before, except now I'll know what I'm missing. Don't. She turned to face him, all the fear and frustration and grief she'd been holding back suddenly spilling over. Don't tell me it's going to be fine. Don't tell me I'll manage. I know I'll manage. I've been managing my whole life. Managing isn't the problem. Then what is? You are. The words came out louder than she'd intended, echoing in the small kitchen. You came here and you helped, and you made me think that maybe I didn't have to do everything alone, that maybe there was something other than just grinding through each day trying not to drown. And now you're leaving and I have to go back to doing it alone, and I hate it. I hate that you made me want something different, and I hate that I let myself want it, and I hate that in 2 weeks you're going to ride out of here and I'm going to have to pretend it doesn't matter. The silence after her outburst was deafening. Rain hammered the roof. Thunder growled. Mara stood there breathing hard, her hands clenched into fists, waiting for him to say something, anything. Brennan took a step closer, then another. He was standing so close now she could see water dripping from his hair, could see the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes had gone dark and intense. You think I want to leave? His voice was low, rough. You think this has been easy for me? Coming here, working beside you, seeing how hard you fight for every inch of this place? Watching you refuse to break no matter what gets thrown at you? I stopped being here out of obligation about 3 days in. After that, I was here because I wanted to be. Because being here with you felt more like home than anywhere I've been in 12 years. Then why are you leaving? Because it's my job. Because I made a commitment. Because... He stopped, ran a hand through his wet hair. Because I don't know how to be anything other than a marshal. It's all I've been for so long, I don't know if there's anything else left. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Probably, but it's true. Mara stared at him, at this man who'd helped save her life and then stayed to help save her ranch, who played cards with her in the evenings and fixed fences during the day and somehow made the unbearable weight of everything feel just a little bit lighter. This man who was about to walk away because he didn't think he knew how to be anything except what he'd always been. You're a coward, she said. His eyes flashed. Excuse me? You heard me. You're a coward. You talk about being tired of losing people, about wanting to build something instead of just tearing things down, and then the second it gets real, you run back to the thing you know. That's not commitment, that's fear. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? You think I'm not scared? I'm terrified every single day. Terrified the ranch will fail, terrified I'll lose what little I have left. Terrified I'll die alone on this piece of land with nothing to show for it, but a headstone next to my husband's. But I stay anyway. I fight anyway. Because the alternative is giving up, and I'm not doing that. So don't you dare stand there and tell me you have to leave because of commitment when what you really mean is you're too scared to stay. It's not that simple. It never is. But you still have to choose. Brennan looked at her like she'd hit him. Maybe she had, with words instead of fists. His jaw worked, and she could see him struggling with something, fighting some internal battle she wasn't privy to. Then he closed the distance between them in one stride and kissed her. It wasn't gentle, wasn't soft or sweet, or any of the things kisses were supposed to be in stories. It was desperate and raw, and tasted like rain and frustration, and all the things neither of them had been brave enough to say. Mara froze for half a second and then kissed him back just as hard, her hands fisting in his wet shirt, pulling him closer. They broke apart gasping, and Brennan rested his forehead against hers, his breathing ragged. "I don't know how to do this." "Neither do I. I'm leaving in 2 weeks." "I know. I don't know if I can come back." "I know that too." He pulled back enough to look at her, his hands still on her waist, his eyes searching hers. "Then what are we doing?" "I have no idea. But I'm tired of pretending I don't want you here, tired of pretending it doesn't matter. So for the next 2 weeks, can we just not pretend? And after that? I don't know. We'll figure it out, or we won't. But at least we'll have 2 weeks of not lying to ourselves." Brennan studied her face like he was memorizing it. Then he kissed her again, softer this time, and Mara felt something in her chest crack open, something she'd kept locked down tight since Thomas died. Hope. Dangerous, fragile, terrifying hope. They spent that night talking instead of sleeping, sitting at the kitchen table while the storm raged outside and the lamp burned low. They talked about everything and nothing. About Brennan's childhood on his father's ranch, the brother he hadn't spoken to in years, the reasons he'd left. About Mara's marriage to Thomas, the quiet happiness they'd had, the way his death had hollowed her out and left her scrambling to fill the space. "I loved him," Mara said, staring into her coffee cup. "But I'm not sure he ever really saw me. Not all of me. Just the parts he wanted to see." "What parts didn't he see?" "The angry parts, the stubborn parts, the parts that wanted more than just a quiet life on a ranch in the middle of nowhere. He was happy with simple, and I tried to be happy with it too, but..." She trailed off, shrugged. "I don't know, maybe I'm just never satisfied. Or maybe you're not meant for simple. Is that supposed to be a compliment? It's supposed to be true." Brennan told her about the first man he'd killed, a bank robber in Nebraska who'd drawn on him during an arrest. He'd been 23, and so sure he was doing the right thing, and then the man was dead, and all Brennan could think about was how young he'd looked. Couldn't have been more than 19. "I threw up after," he admitted, soon as it was over and the adrenaline wore off. "Beck found me in an alley behind the sheriff's office, losing my breakfast. He sat with me until I could stand up again. Didn't say much, just sat there." "Does it get easier?" "No, you just get better at carrying it." The conversation drifted to lighter things eventually, books they'd read, places they'd been, small moments that had mattered for reasons they couldn't quite explain. Mara found herself laughing at his story about a horse that had bucked him into a water trough in front of half the town, and he grinned at her description of the time she'd accidentally set her mother-in-law's kitchen curtains on fire, trying to impress her with her cooking. "Thomas's mother hated me after that," Mara said, "called me careless, said her son deserved better than a girl who couldn't even boil water without causing disaster. Sounds like a charming woman. She was a nightmare. Died about a year after Thomas and I got married. I felt guilty for being relieved." "Guilt's overrated," says the man carrying around 12 years worth of it. Brennan raised his coffee cup in acknowledgement. "Fair point." They talked until the storm passed and the sky started to lighten, until they were both so exhausted they could barely keep their eyes open. Mara stood to go to bed and Brennan caught her hand. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For calling me a coward. Needed to hear it." "You're welcome, I think." He smiled, tired but genuine, and let her go. The next 10 days were strange and wonderful and edged with the constant awareness that they were running out of time. They worked the ranch during the day and talked at night, and sometimes they kissed in the barn or the pasture or the kitchen when the moment felt right. It wasn't a romance from a dime novel. It was messy and complicated, and neither of them knew what they were doing. But it was real. Mara caught herself watching him sometimes, the way he moved through the work with easy competence, the way he'd absently touch her lower back when he passed by, the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention, like she was something worth looking at, worth staying for. She tried not to think about what happened when the 2 weeks ran out. They finished the north fence and moved on to the barn, fixing loose boards and reinforcing the structure. Brennan worked on the loft while Mara organized the tack room, and at one point he called down, "You ever think about selling some of this land? Keep the core acres, sell off the rest?" "Thought about it. My uncle made the same suggestion, minus the part where I get to keep any of it. Could give you enough money to hire real help, make the ranch sustainable long term. Could also feel like giving up." He climbed down from the loft, wiped sawdust from his hands. "It's not giving up if it's strategic. Sometimes you have to let go of part of something to save the whole." "Is that what you're doing? Letting go of this to save your career?" The question hung between them. Brennan's expression went carefully neutral. "That's different." "Is it?" "My career is all I have." "No, it's not. You have a choice. You're just too scared to make it." Mara, "Forget it. I'm sorry, that wasn't fair." But it was fair, and they both knew it. The conversation died, and they went back to work, the tension thick enough to cut. That night, Brennan didn't come to the house for dinner. Mara ate alone, angry at herself for pushing, angry at him for being stubborn, angry at the whole situation for being impossible. She was washing dishes when he finally came in, his expression troubled. "I wrote to Beck," he said without preamble. "Asked if there was any way to extend the leave. He said no. They need me back. There's a case in Wyoming, gang operating out of Cheyenne. They want me on it." Mara kept washing the plate in her hands, focusing on the rhythm of it. "Okay." "That's it? Just okay?" "What do you want me to say? That I'll wait for you? That we'll figure out some way to make this work with you riding off to chase criminals and me stuck here trying to keep the ranch alive? We both know that's not realistic. So we just stop? Pretend these last 2 months didn't happen?" She set the plate down, turned to face him. "I don't know what we do. I just know I'm not going to beg you to stay if you don't want to." "I do want to." "But not enough." His face hardened. "That's not fair. Life's not fair. If it was, my husband wouldn't be dead and my father wouldn't be dead, and I wouldn't be having this conversation with a man who's leaving in 4 days. 3 days, he corrected quietly. The air went out of her. 3 days. Somehow hearing it said out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "I need air," she said, and walked out before he could respond. She went to the cemetery, to the 2 headstones that marked the graves of the men she'd loved. The moon was nearly full, bright enough to read the names carved in stone. Thomas Whitlock. Samuel Whitlock. Husband and father, gone too soon, leaving her to figure out how to survive alone. Except she hadn't been alone. Not for 2 months, anyway. And now she was about to be again, and the thought made her chest tight. "I don't know what to do," she said to the stones. To Thomas mostly, though her father probably had opinions too. "He's leaving, and I want him to stay, but I can't ask that. It's not fair to ask someone to give up their whole life for you. You wouldn't have done it. You chose this place, this life, and I fit into it. I don't know if he can do that. Don't know if I should even want him to." The stones didn't answer. They never did. She heard footsteps behind her and knew without looking it was Brennan. He stood a few feet away, giving her space but making his presence known. "I'm not him," Brennan said quietly. "I can't be what he was to you. I don't want you to be." "Then what do you want?" Mara turned to face him, this man who'd become essential when she wasn't paying attention. "I want you to figure out what you want. Not what you think you should want. Not what's expected or safe or easy. What you actually want. And then I want you to be brave enough to choose it. And if what I want is impossible, then at least you'll know. At least you won't spend the rest of your life wondering." They stood there in the moonlight among the dead, and Mara thought about choices and consequences and the different kinds of courage it took to live a life instead of just surviving one. The last 3 days passed too quickly. They worked dawn to dusk on final repairs, both of them trying to cram as much as possible into the time they had left. The ranch looked better than it had in months, maybe better than it ever had. Fences solid, barn sound, house patched and whole. It was the kind of work that should have taken 6 months with one person or 3 months with two. They'd done it in 2 months of relentless effort. On the last night, they didn't talk about him leaving. They played cards instead, badly, both of them distracted. Mara won 3 hands in a row, and Brennan didn't even call her on the fact that she was obviously cheating. "You're going to let me get away with that?" she asked. "Seems fair. I've been cheating this whole time." "I know. I've known since the second week." He looked up, surprised. "And you didn't say anything?" "I liked watching you think you were getting away with it." Despite everything, he laughed. It was a good sound. She wanted to remember it. They went to bed eventually, separately like they had every night, and Mara lay awake listening to the house settle around her, listening to Brennan move around in the barn loft, getting his things together probably, preparing to leave. She must have slept eventually because she woke to gray dawn light and the sound of a horse being saddled. She dressed quickly and went outside to find Brennan with his gear already packed, his horse ready to go. He looked up when he heard her, his expression carefully neutral. "Didn't want to wake you." "Liar. You were going to leave without saying goodbye." "Thought it might be easier." "For who?" He didn't answer that, just tightened the last strap on his saddle and stood there, not quite looking at her. Mara crossed the distance between them, stopped in front of him close enough to touch, but not touching. "Thank you. For staying, for helping, for everything. You would have been fine without me." "Maybe, but I'm glad I didn't have to be." Something shifted in his expression. Pain, maybe, or regret. "Mara, don't!" She put a hand on his chest, felt his heart beating fast beneath her palm. "Don't make promises you can't keep. Just go. Do your job. Keep people safe. Be the marshal you're supposed to be." "And what about us?" "There is no us. There was 2 months of something good in the middle of something hard, and now it's over. That's all." "That's all?" "That has to be all. Anything else is just going to hurt worse." Brennan covered her hand with his, held it there for a moment. Then he leaned down and kissed her, soft and sad and final. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright. "If things were different, but they're not." "No, they're not." He mounted up, and Mara stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself against the morning cold. He looked down at her from the saddle, memorizing her face probably the same way she was memorizing his. "Take care of yourself," he said. "You too." Then he turned his horse and rode away, and Mara stood in the yard watching until he was just a speck in the distance and then nothing at all. She went inside and made coffee, her hands steady. She had cattle to feed, fences to check, 100 small tasks that needed doing. The ranch didn't care that her chest felt hollow. The work didn't stop just because someone left. She'd survived Thomas leaving. She'd survived her father leaving. She'd survive this too. That's what she told herself anyway, as she drank her coffee and watched the sun come up over the mountains and tried not to count all the ways the house felt too quiet. 3 months passed. Fall came cold and early, frost on the ground by mid-September. Mara hired a ranch hand named Pete, an older man who'd worked ranches his whole life and didn't ask questions about why a young widow was running a place alone. He was competent and quiet and didn't mind that Mara outworked him most days. The ranch held. More than held. The cattle put on weight. The fences stayed solid. Mara sold a section of the south pasture to a neighbor for enough money to get through winter comfortably, and it didn't feel like giving up. It felt like making smart choices. She went to town once a week for supplies and gossip, and people treated her different now, with respect instead of pity. The widow who'd fought off the Hutchins gang, the woman who'd held her ground when everyone expected her to run. It should have felt good. Mostly, it just felt strange. Helen Morrison stopped by one afternoon with bread and an invitation to dinner. They sat on the porch, drinking coffee and watching the mountains go purple in the dusk. "You hear from that marshal?" Helen asked, casual like she was asking about the weather. "No." Shame. He seemed nice." "He was. But not nice enough to stay." Mara looked at her, at this woman who'd lost everything and somehow kept going. "Would you have wanted him to, if you were me?" Helen considered the question seriously. "Depends. If he stayed out of guilt or obligation, no. That would have poisoned it eventually, but if he stayed because he wanted to, because he chose you over everything else, that would have been worth it. He didn't choose me. No, but maybe he'll come back when he figures out what he did choose. And if he doesn't, then you keep going, same as always. It's what we do. Mara thought about that after Helen left, about the different kinds of strength it took to keep going after loss. She'd gotten good at it, too good maybe, but what choice did she have? The first snow came in early November, light flurries that didn't stick but promised worse to come. Mara was in the barn checking supplies when Pete came in looking troubled. "Rider coming," he said. "Looks like he's been on the trail a while." Mara's heart did something complicated. She followed Pete outside and saw the horse first, a gray she didn't recognize. Then the rider came into focus, and it wasn't Brennan. It was Beck, older and more tired-looking than she remembered. "Marshal Beck," she said, surprised. "What brings you out here?" He dismounted stiffly, favoring his right leg, the wound from the fight probably still bothering him. "Mrs. Whitlock, good to see you." "You too. Is everything all right?" "That depends." He looked around the ranch, nodding approval at what he saw. "Place looks good. You've done well." "Thank you, but you didn't ride all the way out here to compliment my fence work." "No." He pulled an envelope from his coat, handed it to her. "This is from Cole. He asked me to deliver it personally." Mara stared at the envelope like it might bite her. Her name was written on the front in handwriting she didn't recognize but somehow knew was Brennan's. Why didn't he come himself? "Because he's in Wyoming. Has been for the last 3 months, working that case I mentioned. It's been difficult. Lost 2 deputies already. The gang we're tracking is smart and mean, and they know the territory better than we do." Beck's expression was grim. "Cole asked for an extension of his assignment, said he wanted to see it through. I approved it. So he's staying in Wyoming. For now." Mara looked at the envelope in her hands, feeling something cold settle in her stomach. Then why send this? Read it and find out. She almost told him to take it back, that she didn't want to read whatever Brennan had written, that it was easier to just let him be gone and get on with her life. But curiosity won out over self-preservation. It usually did. "Come inside," she said. "I'll make coffee." Beck settled at the kitchen table while Mara put the kettle on, the envelope burning a hole in her pocket. When the coffee was ready, she poured 2 cups, sat down across from Beck, and finally opened the letter. The handwriting was neat, careful, like he'd taken time with it. "Mara, I'm not good at this. At saying things that matter. 12 years as a marshal and I can write a crime report in my sleep, but personal letters might as well be in another language. So I'll just say it straight. I made a mistake leaving. I knew it before I was 5 miles from your ranch, and I've known it every day since. I told myself I was doing the right thing, honoring my commitment, being the man I was supposed to be. Truth is, I was scared. You were right about that. Scared of wanting something different, scared of failing at it, scared that if I tried to be anything other than a marshal, I'd find out there was nothing else there. The case in Wyoming is bad. 3 months in, and we're not much closer to catching them than we were at the start. Men are dying, good men, and every time I strap on my gun and ride out, I think about what you said, about building things instead of just tearing them down, about choosing what I want instead of what's expected. I want to come back. I want to help you run that ranch and fix fences and play cards in the evenings and build something that lasts. I want to stop being the man who's always leaving and start being the man who stays. But I can't. Not yet. Not until this job is done and I can walk away from it clean. Beck says that could be another 6 months, maybe longer. I know that's not fair to you. I know I have no right to ask you to wait, but I'm asking anyway. Not for a promise. Not for a commitment. Just for the possibility that when I'm finally done being a marshal, there might still be a place for me on that land you fought so hard to keep. If there's not, I'll understand. You deserve better than someone who took 3 months to figure out what was right in front of him. But if there is, I'll come back. That's a promise I can keep. Mara read it twice, then a third time, her hands shaking slightly. Beck watched her over his coffee, his expression unreadable. He means it, Beck said quietly. In case you're wondering, I've known Cole Brennan for 10 years, never seen him write something like that. Never seen him want anything except the next arrest, the next case. Whatever happened between you two changed him. Changed him enough to come back? Eventually, if you'll have him. Mara set the letter down, stared at it like it might rearrange itself into something easier to understand. 6 months. Maybe longer. Maybe shorter. Or maybe he finishes this case and realizes he can't walk away from the work after all. No guarantees. No guarantees, she echoed. That's supposed to be enough? That's up to you. She thought about it. About 6 months of waiting, of wondering, of keeping the door open for someone who might never walk back through it. About the possibility of building something real with a man who'd already left once and might leave again. About all the ways it could go wrong. And then she thought about the way Brennan had looked at her in the darkness after the fight. The way he'd stayed when he could have left. The way his hands had been gentle fixing her door and fierce holding a rifle and careful touching her face. She thought about hope. Dangerous, fragile hope. Tell him yes, she said. Beck's eyebrows rose. Just like that? Just like that. Tell him I'll be here. No promises, no guarantees. Just here. If he comes back, we'll figure out what that means. If he doesn't, I'll survive. I'm good at that. You are, Beck agreed. He finished his coffee, stood to leave. For what it's worth, I think he'll come back. Man doesn't write a letter like that unless he's already made his choice. Maybe. We'll see. After Beck left, Mara stood in the yard watching the snow start to fall in earnest, the first real snow of the season. She read Brennan's letter one more time by lamplight, then folded it carefully and put it in the drawer where she kept her important papers. 6 months. She could wait 6 months. She'd waited through worse. And if he didn't come back, well, the ranch would still be here. The work would still be here. She'd still be here, fighting for every inch of ground because that's what she did. But somewhere in the back of her mind, in a place she didn't examine too closely, she let herself imagine it. Brennan riding back up that road, hanging up his marshal's badge for good, choosing the life they could build together over the life he'd always known. It was a dangerous thing to imagine, but she did it anyway and went to sleep that night with something that felt almost like peace. Winter hit hard that year. By mid-December, the snow was 3 feet deep in places, and the temperature hadn't climbed above freezing in 2 weeks. Mara and Pete spent their days breaking ice on the water troughs, checking the cattle for frostbite, hauling feed through drifts that came up to their knees. It was brutal, relentless work that left no room for thinking about anything except survival. Which was good. Thinking led to wondering, and wondering led to counting the days since Brennan had left, and that path didn't go anywhere useful. She'd gotten one more letter in early December, delivered by a mail carrier who'd looked half-frozen and wholly miserable. The letter had been short. Still here, still working. Gang hit a bank in Laramie last week, killed 2 people. We're close now. I can feel it. Beck says another month, maybe 2. I hope he's right. I hope you're staying warm. I hope you haven't changed your mind. She hadn't written back. What was there to say? That she was fine, the ranch was fine, everything was fine except for the part where she was waiting for a man who might never come back. That felt too vulnerable, too much like admitting she needed him when she'd spent her whole life proving she didn't need anyone. So she'd folded the letter with the first one and kept working. Christmas came and went quietly. Helen invited her to dinner at the boarding house where half the town had gathered, and Mara went because staying alone on the ranch felt too much like admitting defeat. The food was good, the company was warm, and she managed to smile and make conversation and pretend she wasn't thinking about last Christmas when Thomas had still been alive, and her father had carved the turkey, and everything had been simpler. Not better, necessarily. Just simpler. You holding up all right? Helen asked her privately, catching her in the kitchen while Mara was helping with dishes. Well enough. That's not what I asked. Mara scrubbed at a stubborn bit of gravy on a plate. I'm tired, Helen. I'm tired of fighting for everything, tired of doing it alone, tired of waiting for things to get easier and having them just get different instead. That Marshall coming back? I don't know. He says he is. But saying and doing are different things. Helen took the plate from her, dried it, set it aside. My Ed used to say that hope was the most dangerous thing on earth. that it would kill you faster than bullets or disease because it made you think things could be different than they were. I told him he was wrong. Hope's what keeps you breathing when everything else is telling you to stop. And if the thing you're hoping for doesn't happen, then you find something else to hope for. It's not about the specific thing, honey. It's about keeping that part of yourself alive that believes better is possible. Mara went home that night with Helen's words rattling around in her head. And when she got to the ranch, she found Pete had left a fire burning in the stove and a note saying he'd check the cattle in the morning so she could sleep in. It was a small kindness, the kind that didn't fix anything but somehow made everything more bearable. She went to bed thinking about hope and what it cost to keep believing in it. January brought a thaw, the temperature climbing just enough to turn the snow to slush and the roads to mud. Mara made the trip to town for supplies and came back to find a stranger on her porch. Young, maybe 20, with a badge on his chest and an official-looking envelope in his hand. "Mrs. Whitlock?" "That's me." "Deputy Marshal Williams. I have a message from Marshal Beck." Mara's heart did something complicated. She took the envelope with hands that wanted to shake and managed not to let them. "Is Cole all right?" The young deputy's expression flickered. "He was when I left Cheyenne 3 days ago, but the situation's changed. Marshal Beck thought you should know." She opened the envelope standing right there in the cold, too impatient to wait. Beck's handwriting, sharp and efficient. "Mara, the Wyoming gang is cornered. We got word they're holed up in a canyon outside Buffalo, planning one last big score before they scatter. We're moving on them tomorrow at dawn. It's going to be bad. Odds aren't good. Cole wanted me to tell you that if something happens to him, he doesn't regret coming to your ranch. Said it was the best 2 months of his life, and if he had to do it over, he'd make the same choice. I told him he was being morbid and dramatic. He told me to write the letter anyway. If you don't hear from us within a week, assume the worst. If you do hear from us, well, maybe he'll be the one delivering the message." Beckmara read it twice, the words blurring slightly. Deputy Williams was watching her with the uncomfortable expression of someone who delivered bad news and wasn't sure what to do about the recipient's reaction. "When did he write this?" she asked, keeping her voice level. 5 days ago. They were moving out when I left." 5 days. The fight could already be over. Brennan could already be dead, bleeding out in some frozen canyon while she stood here reading about it after the fact. "Thank you for bringing this," she managed. "Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry it's not better news." He left and Mara stood on the porch holding the letter, staring at nothing. Pete came out of the barn, took one look at her face and said, "What happened?" "Nothing. Maybe. I don't know yet." She told him about Brennan, about Wyoming, about the fight that was happening or had already happened, and the fact that she had no way of knowing which. Pete listened without interrupting, his weathered face sympathetic. "Not much you can do except wait," he said finally. "I'm so tired of waiting." "I know, but that's all there is right now." She went inside and tried to work, tried to keep her hands busy and her mind occupied. It didn't work. She kept thinking about Brennan riding into that canyon, kept imagining all the ways it could go wrong. Bullets and blood and him lying in the snow, wondering if she'd gotten the message. A week, Beck had said. 7 days before she could assume the worst. She started counting. The days crawled past like wounded animals. Mara threw herself into work with a desperation that worried Pete enough that he started making excuses to check on her more often than necessary. She fixed things that didn't need fixing, reorganized the barn, rode out to check fences in weather that was too cold for it. Anything to keep moving, keep busy, keep from thinking about day 6 turning into day 7, turning into day 8 with no word. On the 5th day, Helen showed up with bread and determination. "You look terrible," she said, pushing past Mara into the kitchen. "Nice to see you too." "I'm serious. When's the last time you slept?" "I sleep." "When's the last time you slept more than 2 hours at a stretch?" Mara didn't answer that. Helen sighed and started making coffee, moving around the kitchen like she owned it. "You're going to make yourself sick, and for what? You don't even know if something's happened." "That's the problem. I don't know. I hate not knowing." "So go find out." Mara stared at her. "What?" "You heard me. If waiting is killing you, stop waiting. Ride to Wyoming. Find out what happened. At least then you'll know." That's crazy. It's a week's ride minimum, probably longer in this weather. And what am I going to do when I get there? I'm not a marshal. I can't help with whatever's happening. You can be there. You can know. That's got to be better than sitting here driving yourself insane. I can't just abandon the ranch. Pete can handle it for a week. He's been handling ranches longer than you've been alive. Stop making excuses and admit you're scared. Of course I'm scared. I'm terrified. What if I ride all that way and he's already dead? What if I get there just in time to watch them bury him? Helen set down the coffee pot, came to stand in front of Mara with her hands on her hips. And what if you don't go and you never know? What if you sit here for the rest of your life wondering if maybe you could have made a difference? Could have been there when it mattered? I'm not a hero, Helen. I'm just someone who got lucky once. Luck, nothing. You're someone who fights, so fight for this. Fight for him the way you fought for this ranch. Mara looked at this woman who'd lost everything and somehow found the strength to keep believing in things, and felt something crack open in her chest. Helen was right. Sitting here waiting was its own kind of death. At least if she went, she'd be doing something, making a choice instead of letting circumstance choose for her. I'd have to leave tonight, she said slowly. Take the best horse, pack light, ride hard. Maybe make it in 5 days if the weather holds. So do it. Pete will think I've lost my mind. Pete will understand. Everyone understands fighting for what matters. Mara made the decision in the space between one breath and the next. All right, I'm going. Help me pack. They worked quickly, efficiently. Warm clothes, dried food, a bedroll, ammunition. The rifle and her father's old revolver that she'd never learned to shoot well, but carried anyway. Helen raided her own pantry for extra supplies while Mara saddled the bay gelding Thomas had bought the year before he died, the strongest horse on the ranch. Pete found them as Mara was tying down her gear. He looked at the packed horse, at Mara's determined expression, and shook his head. You're going after him. I'm going to find out what happened. There's a difference. Not much of one. You know this is crazy. So I've been told. He was quiet for a moment, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. Emergency money. For supplies or a doctor or whatever you need. Don't argue, just take it. Mara felt her throat tighten. Pete, take it, and come back safe. Ranch will be here when you get back. I'll make sure of it. She took the pouch, tucked it carefully into her coat. Thank you. Don't thank me, just don't get yourself killed. I'm too old to train another boss. Despite everything, she smiled. Then she mounted up, looked down at Helen and Pete standing in the yard, and felt a surge of gratitude for these people who'd decided she was worth helping. I'll be back, she said. You better be, Helen replied. Then Mara turned the horse toward the road and rode out into the gathering dusk, leaving the ranch behind for the second time in her life and hoping she'd make it back for the third. The ride was brutal. 5 days in winter on horseback, pushing through mountain passes and across frozen plains where the wind cut through every layer of clothing like it had a personal grudge. Mara stopped only when the horse needed rest, sleeping in her bedroll under whatever shelter she could find, eating dried meat and hardtack, and trying not to think about frostbite. On the third day, she rode through Buffalo and got directions to the marshal's office. The deputy there, not Williams, someone older with tired eyes, looked at her like she'd grown a second head when she asked about the gang fight. That was 2 weeks ago, ma'am. All wrapped up. Her heart stopped. What happened? Marshals caught them in the canyon like they planned. Fight lasted about 20 minutes. 3 gang members dead, 4 in custody. 2 deputies wounded, 1 marshal. He consulted a ledger. Marshal Brennan took a bullet to the shoulder. Touch and go for a few days, but the doc says he'll make it. Mara had to sit down. The deputy brought her water and looked concerned. You all right? Where is he, Brennan? Where is he now? Recovery house on 3rd Street, Doc Morgan's place. But, ma'am, visiting hours are... She was already out the door. The recovery house was a converted boarding house that smelled like carbolic and suffering. A nurse tried to stop her at the front desk, but Mara pushed past with a determination that made the woman decide it wasn't worth the fight. She climbed the stairs 2 at a time, checking rooms until she found him. Brennan was in a bed by the window, his shoulder heavily bandaged, his face pale but alive. So alive. He was asleep, breathing steady, and Mara stood in the doorway just looking at him for a long moment. Then his eyes opened. They stared at each other. He looked like he thought he might be hallucinating. Mara? She crossed to the bed, sat down hard in the chair beside it. You're alive. Mostly. His voice was rough, unused. What are you doing here? Beck sent a letter, said the odds weren't good, said you might not make it. I waited 5 days and couldn't stand it anymore, so I rode here to find out what happened. You rode here? From Montana. In January. Apparently I'm not as smart as I thought I was. Something happened to his expression, something that looked like wonder mixed with disbelief. You came for me. I came for answers. You're just the unfortunate recipient. Liar. She didn't deny it. Couldn't. How bad is it? Shoulder's torn up pretty good. Doc says I'll heal, but it'll take time. Might not have full range of motion again. He tried to shift position and grimaced. Hurts like hell. Good. You deserve it for making me wait. Making you wait? I got shot. Your own fault for getting in the way of bullets. They looked at each other and suddenly they were both almost laughing, that edge of hysteria relief that came from surviving something that should have killed you. I got your letter, she said when the laughter faded. Both of them. And? And I'm here. Figure that speaks for itself. Brennan reached out with his good hand and she took it, his fingers warm and solid around hers. I meant what I wrote. I want to come back. I'm done being a marshal, done chasing criminals across the territory, done putting bullets in people and wondering if it matters. I want to fix fences and work cattle and play cards in the evening and wake up in the same place every morning. I want to build something that lasts. With you. If you'll have me. That's a pretty speech. You practice it? About 1,000 times while I was recovering. Did it work? Mara looked at him, this man who'd saved her life and stolen her heart and almost gotten himself killed in Wyoming. This man who'd figured out what he wanted and was brave enough to choose it, even though it meant giving up everything he'd known. You can't work a ranch with a bad shoulder, she said. I'll manage. Done harder things. You'll have to live in the house. Barn's too cold in winter. I can do that. And you'll have to deal with Pete. He's particular about how things get done. I'll win him over. And you're going to have to marry me because I'm not having people talk. Brennan's expression went very still. Is that a proposal? That's a requirement. You want to stay on my ranch? You make an honest woman of me. Otherwise, my uncle will never let me hear the end of it. Mara Whitlock, are you asking me to marry you? I'm telling you the terms of your employment. Take it or leave it. His smile was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. I'll take it. Good. Then shut up and rest so you can heal faster and get back to work. Ranch doesn't run itself. He tugged her hand, pulled her closer. Come here first. She leaned down and he kissed her, careful of his injuries, his good hand coming up to cup her face. It was gentle and fierce and felt like coming home. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his and said quietly, Don't you dare die on me. I didn't ride 5 days through winter to watch you bleed out in a recovery house. Wasn't planning on it. Got too much to live for now. She stayed with him for a week, sleeping in a chair by his bed and bullying the doctors into letting her help with his care. Brennan healed faster than anyone expected, driven by sheer stubbornness and the promise of what was waiting when he was well enough to leave. Beck showed up on the 3rd day, took one look at Mara, and shook his head. Should have known you'd track him down. Should have known better than to send me a letter like that. Fair point. He looked at Brennan. You tell her yet? Tell me what? Mara asked. Brennan shifted uncomfortably. I resigned, officially. Sent the paperwork to the territorial office last week. Soon as I'm cleared by the doc, I'm done. And you didn't think to mention this? Was waiting for the right moment. The right moment would have been immediately. Beck grinned. I'll leave you two to fight it out. Cole, when you're ready to travel, come find me. Got your final pay and references. Least I can do after 12 years of service. He left and Mara turned to Brennan with her arms crossed. Anything else you're not telling me? I wrote to my brother. Told him I was getting married, settling down, trying the ranch life again. He wrote back, said it was about time I got my head out of my rear end and that he's happy for me. You have a brother who writes like that? Apparently I do now. Also said if I mess this up, he's riding to Montana to kick my rear end personally. I like him already. By the end of the second week, Brennan was cleared to travel, his shoulder still tender but healing clean. They made the journey back to Montana slowly, stopping often, giving him time to rest. It should have been miserable, late January in the mountains, camping in snow, riding through weather that would have been considered criminal if weather could be prosecuted. Instead, it was the best 2 weeks of Mara's life. They talked about everything, about the ranch and how to run it, about what needed doing come spring, about whether to get chickens or focus on cattle, about stupid things like favorite foods and whether coffee should be strong enough to stand a spoon in or weak enough to see through, about serious things like fear and loss and the different ways people survive trauma. "You ever regret staying?" Brennan asked one night as they sat by the fire. After the fight, ever wish you'd sold the ranch and left? Every day for the first month, then less, then not at all. She poked at the fire with a stick. The ranch stopped being about Thomas or my father somewhere along the way. It became about me, about proving I could do it, and once it was about me, I couldn't let it go. What about now? Now that you're not doing it alone anymore? Now it's about us, building something together. That feels different, better. What if I'm terrible at it? What if I can't pull my weight with a bad shoulder? Then you'll figure it out. Same way I figured out how to survive after Thomas died. Same way you figured out how to stop being a marshal. We'll figure it out together. He kissed her then, slow and thorough, and Mara thought about partnerships and second chances and the strange way life had of taking you apart just so it could put you back together differently. They made it back to the ranch on a Tuesday in early February, the sky clear and cold and achingly blue. Pete came out of the barn when he heard the horses, took one look at them together, and grinned. "About damn time." "Good to see you too, Pete," Mara said, dismounting. "Everything hold up all right?" "Ranch is fine, cattle are fine, I'm fine. You look half frozen and completely happy, so I'm guessing things went well." "Things went very well. Pete, this is Cole Brennan. He's going to be staying permanently." Pete looked at Brennan, at his bandaged shoulder, at the way he was already scanning the ranch like he was taking inventory. "Can you work?" "With time." "You any good at it?" "Good enough." "You gonna make her happy?" "Going to try my best." Pete nodded like that settled something. "Good. Because if you don't, I've got a shotgun and no moral objections to using it." "Understood." They settled in quickly, the three of them falling into a rhythm that worked better than Mara had expected. Brennan's shoulder limited what he could do at first, but he was useful anyway, helping with the smaller tasks, planning the spring work, learning the specific quirks of Mara's operation. Pete warmed to him inside a week, especially after Brennan fixed the henhouse door that had been sticking for months. "Man's got good hands," Pete told Mara approvingly. "Shame about the shoulder, but he'll heal. They usually do." They were married in March by the circuit preacher who came through Elkhorn twice a year. It wasn't fancy, just Mara in her best dress, and Brennan in clothes borrowed from Pete because his marshal's uniform didn't fit the life he was choosing. Helen stood up for Mara. Beck traveled from Wyoming to stand up for Brennan. The ceremony took 10 minutes and felt more real than anything Mara had experienced in years. Afterward, they had dinner at the saloon with half the town, and Marcus Whitaker showed up uninvited to glare at them from across the room. Mara ignored him with the ease of someone who'd stopped caring what he thought months ago. "Your uncle looks like he's plotting murder," Brennan observed. "He can plot all he wants. Doesn't change anything." "You really don't care what he thinks?" "Not even a little bit. I stopped needing his approval the day I decided to keep the ranch. You marrying me just made it official." Brennan smiled and kissed her right there in front of everyone, and Mara heard Helen laugh and someone whistle and felt happier than she'd been since before Thomas died. They went home that night to a house that was theirs now, both of them, and started the business of building a life. Spring came late but fierce, the snow melting in floods that turned the creeks to rivers. Mara and Brennan worked dawn to dusk getting the ranch ready, repairing winter damage, moving cattle to fresh pasture, planning the season's work. Brennan's shoulder improved slowly, but it improved, and by May he could lift fence posts again without his face going white. They hired another hand in June, a young man named Sam, who was green but willing to learn. With 3 people working the ranch, things that had seemed impossible before became merely difficult. They expanded the herd, fixed the irrigation system, added another section of grazing land. The ranch thrived. So did Mara. She caught herself smiling at nothing sometimes, humming while she worked, looking forward to evenings instead of dreading the empty quiet. Brennan had a way of making even the hard days bearable, cracking jokes while they mucked stalls or telling stories about his marshal days while they mended tack. They still played cards most evenings, both still cheating, neither calling the other on it. In August, Helen came to visit and found Mara in the garden looking contemplatively at nothing. "You all right?" Helen asked. "I think I might be pregnant." Helen's face lit up. "Think or know?" "Pretty sure. Haven't been to a doctor yet, but all the signs are there." She touched her stomach carefully. "Wasn't planning on it. Not this soon anyway." "Does Cole know?" "Not yet. Wanted to be certain first, but Helen, I'm terrified. What if something happens? What if I lose this baby like—" She stopped, couldn't finish. Helen sat down beside her, took her hand. "You can't live your life afraid of what might go wrong. Yes, bad things happen. They happen to you, they happen to me. But good things happen too, and you deserve the good things, Mara. You've earned them." She told Brennan that night after dinner when they were sitting on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains. She was nervous, which was stupid because she knew he'd be happy. But still, "I need to tell you something." He looked at her, immediately concerned. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. At least I don't think so, but I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." The expression on his face went through about 6 different emotions in 3 seconds. Shock, joy, fear, wonder, and settling finally on something that looked like awe. "A baby," he repeated. "A baby. Probably due in February if my timing's right. I know it's fast and we didn't plan for this and—" He kissed her, cutting off the rambling. When he pulled back, he was grinning like an idiot. "We're having a baby." "You're not upset?" "Upset? Mara, this is the best news I've gotten since you agreed to marry me. We're having a baby." "You said that already." "I'll probably say it 100 more times before it feels real." He put his hand on her stomach, still flat, but not for long, and Mara felt tears prick her eyes. Happy tears this time, the good kind. They sat there together as the light failed and the stars came out, making plans for a future that felt suddenly, impossibly bright. A nursery in the spare room, names to consider. Whether to hire more help so Mara could rest in the last months. All the small practical details that added up to a life being built from scratch. The baby came in early March during the worst snowstorm in 20 years. The doctor almost didn't make it through the drifts, and there was a tense hour where Mara thought she might have to deliver with just Brennan and Helen's help. But Doc Morgan arrived, cranky and half frozen, and 6 hours later Mara was holding her daughter while Brennan sat beside her looking shell-shocked. "She's so small," he said for the 3rd time. "That's how babies work." "She's perfect." "She's wrinkled and red and screaming. She's many things, but perfect isn't one of them." "She's perfect," he insisted. They named her Sarah, after Mara's mother. She had Thomas's dark hair and Brennan's eyes, and Mara's stubborn chin. She was loud and demanding and absolutely tyrannical from day one. Mara had never been so exhausted or so happy in her entire life. The ranch adjusted to accommodate its newest member. Pete built a cradle that would have survived a tornado. Helen brought baby clothes and advice. Sam took on extra work so Mara could rest. Brennan turned out to be surprisingly good with babies, walking Sarah for hours when she was fussy, singing her songs in a rough voice that somehow always put her to sleep. Mara watched him one night, holding their daughter and swaying gently, and thought about all the versions of her life that could have happened. The one where she'd left after Thomas died. The one where she'd refused the marshal's help and died fighting the gang alone. The one where she'd sent Brennan away instead of asking him to stay. All those other versions felt like different people living different lives. This version, the one where she'd fought and survived and built something new from the ashes of what she'd lost, this was the real one, the one that mattered. "What are you thinking about?" Brennan asked, catching her watching. "How lucky we are." "Luck had nothing to do with it. You fought for this, for all of it." "We fought for it." "Fair enough." He looked down at Sarah, sleeping now against his shoulder. You think she'll grow up to be stubborn like her mother? Without question. Poor kid doesn't stand a chance. She'll be fine. She comes from tough stock. They stood there together in the quiet house, their daughter asleep between them, and Mara felt something settle in her chest that she recognized belatedly as contentment. Not the absence of struggle, the ranch would always be a fight, life would always be hard, but the presence of something worth fighting for. The years that followed weren't easy. There were droughts and harsh winters, cattle lost to disease, fences blown down in storms. There were arguments about money and work and how to handle Sarah when she turned out to be every bit as stubborn as predicted. There were days Mara wanted to scream from frustration, and nights she fell into bed too exhausted to see straight. But there were good days too, more of them than bad. Days when the work went smoothly and the weather cooperated, evenings on the porch with Brennan while Sarah played in the yard, mornings waking up next to someone who'd chosen her every single day and kept choosing her. Marcus eventually gave up trying to buy the ranch and settled for bitter acceptance. Beck retired from the Marshal Service and moved to Elkhorn, where he opened a security business and became a regular at their dinner table. Helen remarried, a widower from town who made her laugh and didn't mind that she spoke her mind. Pete worked the ranch until he was 72, then finally accepted that maybe it was time to slow down. They gave him a cottage on the property, and he spent his retirement fishing and complaining about how Sam and the newer hands didn't do things right. Sarah grew up wild and fearless, riding before she could walk properly, learning to work cattle before she learned to write. She had Mara's determination and Brennan's calm and absolutely no patience for people who underestimated her because she was a girl. She's going to be a handful, Brennan said one day, watching their 8-year-old daughter rope a calf with alarming accuracy. She already is. Think she'll stay and run the ranch? I think she'll do whatever she wants and we'll support her either way. That's what you do when you love someone. He pulled her close, kissed the top of her head. When'd you get so wise? I've always been wise. You were just too stubborn to notice. They stood there watching their daughter work, the ranch spread out around them in all its hard-won glory, and Mara thought about the girl she'd been at 26, alone and terrified and ready to give up. That girl felt like a stranger now, someone she'd known once but had grown beyond. She'd survived Thomas's death and her father's death and the Hutchins gang and a dozen other things that should have broken her. She'd fought for her land and her life and built something that would last beyond her years. She'd found love when she'd stopped looking for it and learned that survival wasn't the same as living. The ranch would be here long after she was gone. Sarah would run it someday, or sell it, or do something else entirely with it. That was fine. Mara had done what she'd set out to do, proved that she could hold on to something that mattered, that she was more than just a widow who couldn't hack it. She'd done more than survive. She'd lived. And that was enough. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Brennan's arm was warm around her shoulders. Sarah was laughing at something Sam had said. The house stood solid behind them, patched and painted and thoroughly lived in. Mara looked at all of it, the ranch, the people, the life she'd built from nothing but stubbornness and refusal to quit, and felt something rise in her chest that might have been pride or might have been peace. Either way, it felt like home.